Hi, welcome to the Git and GitHub masterclass. This is the introductory lecture. We will be talking about the instructors of this course as well as the overall structure. So if you are starting to learn this course, we assume that you have heard of Git and GitHub or maybe one of them, and you would like to learn how to use it. Maybe you have heard of that from your colleagues or friends or someone else, but you have no idea why it is useful, but you know that you have to learn it. If you are in this bucket, don't worry. Most of the people who take this course are taking the course for the same reason, exact same reason. In fact, this is probably the third time we are recording this course by revamping the content, because we realized that after conducting a couple of webinars on this exact same topic, most of the people are actually not aware of the different functionalities of GitHub or even the basic principles behind it. Most of them have just heard of it. If you are already familiar with Git or GitHub, of course, you will find some things trivial in this course, but I assure you, you will still end up learning a lot if you follow this course throughout. So welcome to this course, and this course will be conducted by the four of us, Dr. Raj Dandekar, Dr. Rajat Dandekar, Dr. Sridhar Panat, myself, and Abhijit Singh. We'll introduce you to our team in detail. So, as I mentioned, there is a huge crowd of people. Every single one of them have heard of GitHub, but once you start asking any serious question to any of them, you will realize that the people who actually know Git or GitHub, or the people who actually use it on a daily basis to enhance their, let's say, collaborative efforts or productivity, the number of such people are very low. And we have a singular mission in this course, which is to take you from this left-hand side bucket or group of left-hand side people to the right-hand side group of people. If you follow this masterclass throughout till the last lecture, and if you do all the assignments that are part of this course, I sincerely believe that you will be in a very, very good shape. And this is the team who is behind this course. I'll introduce you to each of them. So Dr. Raj, Dr. Rajat, and myself, Dr. Sridhar, we are all colleagues for last many years, and we were also friends since we were undergraduate students at IIT Madras. And Dr. Raj and myself finished our PhD from MIT in the US, and Dr. Rajat finished his PhD from Purdue University. We are also the co-founders of Visuara, and Abhijit is our colleague who is a machine learning expert, who is an incredible expert at GitHub as well. So he was kind enough to create a good portion of this course, and I'm sure you will learn a lot from him as well. So the four of us are behind creating this course as well as delivering it. And the course itself is divided into a few different chapters. I will come to that in a moment. But it'll be great to discuss why you as a student, or if you are an industry professional, why you should really care about this topic. Sometimes you are working on individual projects, maybe for hobby or maybe for developing your profile. I was for sure working on individual hobby projects. Some of them were of the nature of where coding was involved, and many of the projects had no aspect of coding. And I have worked in small teams, like maybe 3 members. I have worked in intermediate sized teams for startups. And I have seen from my experience that whether you are an individual or whether you are working as part of the team, at some point you will feel the need for having a system for taking care of, let's say you are working on set of documents, taking care of the different versions of the document, taking care of somehow documenting all the different changes you made in the past, or taking care of the fact that you and your colleagues are making edits on the exact same document at the same time. So all of this, how do you take care of this? Git or GitHub is the answer. So whether you belong as an individual contributor in a big company, or you're just working on some hobby projects yourself, or if you are part of the team, you will inevitably end up using GitHub. Most of the companies, I would say almost all companies, use GitHub in their teams. This is especially for coding related aspects. But in this lecture, you will see that in fact, the usage of GitHub is not just restricted for coding. It's used in documenting the workflow. It's used for project management. It is used even sometimes in research paper writing. It's used for hosting websites, and there are many other functionalities for GitHub. And what is Git and what is GitHub? What's the difference between these two? You will learn all of that as part of this course. And there is one more very important reason why you should care about GitHub. It's that, see, this screenshot was taken from my GitHub profile. What you see here is these, you see bunch of squares here. These squares are distributed over different weeks and over different months. I mean, over different days of the week over these many months. And I have highlighted the year 2023, and it clearly shows the days in which I have made certain contributions to GitHub. And when I say contribution to GitHub, what I simply mean is I made some changes. I have a centralized GitHub repository where all my work is stored, and I made some changes to that work or to that project. So GitHub really keeps track of that. And if it's like bright green in color, it means I made maximum contribution around that time. If it is completely black or gray color, it means very less or even zero contribution. So GitHub really do keep track of your contributions. And when you are creating a resume for a job application, you will most likely link your GitHub profile in your resume. And imagine your GitHub profile looked something like this, where most of these squares are gray or black color, and one or only a few squares are in green color. It does not make sense to the employer, right? Because they will expect you to have some experience using GitHub based on what you mentioned in the CV or in the resume. But then when they look at your GitHub profile, it literally looks like this. And do you really think they would want to hire someone like this? Because it's a little bit suspicious, or it something does not add up. So not knowing GitHub or not using GitHub, it can definitely hurt your job prospects or placement prospects if you are currently a student in a college, especially while applying for roles that involve coding or working in a team on certain projects of that nature. So this is why it's extremely important to know GitHub. It's also extremely important to use it. And when you are part of a team, obviously you will end up learning it, but maybe in the painful way. And this course will try to make it as seamless as possible for you. I took this image screenshot from this website, programmerhumor.io. But basically, you don't want your profile to look something like this, with mostly gray, a few of them in green, but rather you would like, it's in your best interest if your profile looks something more like this. And why is that the case? Because this shows that you are a serious programmer, or you are a serious person who organizes your projects in a way where you keep track of the changes you make, you keep track of all different versions of different files that are part of your project, and all of this is systematically done in your GitHub repositories. So it's very important that you appear very professional, even if you are good at coding, even if you are you have the skills. You should show your ability to manage these documents in a very systematic manner. So this masterclass is divided into 6 different segments. The current lecture, which is the introductory lecture, will talk about what exactly is Git or GitHub, the basic idea behind that, why was it even invented, or why was it built in the first place. And you will also learn that Git and GitHub are not the same thing. You will understand what prerequisites you might need if you are taking a deep dive into Git or GitHub. You will learn about who owns these platforms. Are these softwares? Are these websites? Are these frameworks? You will learn about that. And also you will learn about some alternate options. If you don't want to use Git or GitHub, what are some other options? And what are some use cases? What are some rookie mistakes? All of these you will get a flavor of from this introductory lecture. The second part of this course will be covering purely about Git. if you really want to understand GitHub, you have to know Git. You can also, completely skip the part of Git and still learn about GitHub if you intend to just use it for basic things. But since you anyway have made the decision to go through this course, I highly recommend that you go through Git first properly, so that all basic commands, actions, and you get a good mental picture also is forming in your mind, along with all the different actions that are involved in using Git. Once we cover some basics of Git plus some advanced aspects about Git in the second part of this course, we will move to the third part, and third part is all about GitHub. In principle, there are so many things common between Git and GitHub, but GitHub is maybe a very user-friendly way to implement the idea of Git. And you will understand why that is the case. And here we'll be covering how you install or how you create an account in Git, how you make your first repository or first push of your code. Push meaning it's equivalent to uploading. Just imagine uploading. How do you do that to GitHub? You will learn how to implement the basic commands, basic Git commands in Git, and also some advanced techniques. Now, I just mentioned that GitHub makes implementation of Git very easy. Now, there is one more thing called GitHub Desktop. What does GitHub Desktop do? It makes the usage of GitHub even more easier, so that you can use GitHub without having to code terminal commands. If you don't understand what is terminal, what exact terminal commands are we talking about here, don't worry at this point. I'm just mentioning this so that you can get an overview about the course, but I'm fully aware that probably you are not familiar with all the terminologies that I'm speaking right now, and that's completely all right. But basically, GitHub Desktop is an amazing software, which is like a graphical user interface, and it allows you to use GitHub without having to write any code or commands in the terminal. After this, we will show exactly how you can use GitHub as a student, as a researcher, or as a professional. We will show a few different use cases. We will demonstrate how to use GitHub for this. In this part, we will not be covering Git, although Git is inherently a part of GitHub. We will be talking about how to use GitHub for this. And in the last part of the course, we will be covering certain advanced concepts, which are almost like a bonus material. We'll be talking about GitHub Pages, which is one way in which you can host websites using GitHub. We will talk briefly about GitLab. It's an alternate to GitHub. It also has so many things common with GitHub. We will talk about some famous GitHub repositories that you can have a look at, which may benefit you. We will talk about something called CI/CD, how you can continuously integrate changes, how to continuously deploy them. And we will also teach you how to perform open source contributions to famous projects or famous repositories. And once you become an open source contributor, that is really a proof that you are really good at using GitHub. You are really good at collaborating with others. Once you learn the basic etiquettes of how to request pull, like when you commit a change to somebody's work. So let's say I am owning a project, but I invite collaborators, like let's say three others, and they are making, or they're rather proposing some changes to my original, let's say, code base. There is a certain way in which that has to be done. And we'll teach you what are the best practices when it comes to that. So overall, this will be the structure of this masterclass. So once again, please welcome to this course. Please take your time. Don't try to finish this in one go. I don't recommend that. Try to go it lesson by lesson. And whenever we mention some hands-on examples, try to implement it by pausing the video lecture. And we will also be providing some assignments. Try to do that very diligently. And at the end of all of this, I completely assure you that you will feel exceptionally comfortable using GitHub, and probably you yourself can teach someone about what you have learned. So if you reach that level at the end of this course, we'll be extremely happy. So let's get into the introduction part of this Git and GitHub masterclass. So let's start the course introduction, not by learning some basics of GitHub, but let's look at how long can we actually go without learning Git or GitHub? Because why learn something if you are not going to use it, right? So I have been through most of these stages that I have mentioned here. So let's look at this table row by row. I have mentioned list of 8 projects. And I have also mentioned the nature of the project, whether it's an individual or group project, whether the project is simple or complex. It's very subjective, I know, but still we have a pretty good metric of, we have an internal metric of what is simple, what is complex, right? And whether the project involved writing code or not. So let's look at the first case. If it's an individual project, if it is a simple project, and if there is no code involved, GitHub is not really needed. You don't have to learn GitHub. You don't have to learn Git. So if you are falling in this category, and you're wondering if you should really force fit GitHub into your, let's say, work routine, no, it's not needed. The second category of project, which is individual project, complex project, and no code, maybe here also GitHub is not needed. I mean, I understand that there are some complex projects that you are working on. It might be your hobby project, which has got nothing to do with coding, but maybe it is writing a book, or maybe it's collecting a bunch of resources which will help you learn about UI UX design, something like that. And you must have come across interesting GitHub repositories with large number of stars for this purpose. But it's not really necessary to use GitHub in these cases. But if you're working on an individual level on a simple project, I would say that yes, and if this project involves coding, I would say that yes, GitHub will be useful. It's useful for two reasons. One is, okay, even if it's a simple project, if you start using GitHub, your work will be in that place. It will be there forever. It's on the cloud. You will not lose it. So you can come back at any point of time to this project and the code will be there. And you will be able to very nicely control the version of the code such that at the end of the day, you will have a version that is really working. But imagine in many other cases when you are really writing pieces of code and copy pasting it within a folder saying version 1, version 2, final version, final version. Of course, we all have done this. If you are doing this and maybe after 2 years you come back to this project, you would like to use the code, but you have no idea which one is the latest one. What are the issues of these codes? This code, like the code which you wrote a while ago, you don't know what is the case. So this is why I think even for simple individual projects that involve coding, GitHub will be useful. The fourth category is individual projects which are of complex nature and which involves coding. Of course, GitHub is recommended. This will save you a lot of time in organizing the way you are executing this project. The categories 5, 6, 7, and 8 are group categories for the individual projects listed from project 1 to project 4. So the project 5, which is group project, but simple, without any coding, GitHub is probably not needed. But if it is a complex group project, even if code is not involved, Git is recommended. GitHub is recommended because let's say you are a team of 4 people writing a very big 350-page book. It's a very good idea if you are working. I mean, if you are working on this book on a Google document online, you probably don't need GitHub. But if the book involves a lot of other resources like collection of figures, tables, and graphs that need to be added later, and you want to control the version of all of this in a very nice manner, people sometimes use GitHub. Of course, there are other specialized tools for the example of book writing that I just mentioned, but it'll be a good idea to consider version control systems at that point. If you are working on a group project, even if it's simple, if it involves coding, it is very much recommended to use GitHub. And finally, if you're working on a complex group project, if that involves coding, GitHub is again very much recommended. So you can see here and take a call for yourself whether you will be using GitHub you would want to be using GitHub at a certain point or not. And this is also a natural progression of people, right? Initially, you will not know coding. You'll be working individually on projects which are of simple nature. Then you will work on some complex projects. Then you will learn coding, and you will initially work on some simple coding projects. Then you will individually work on some complex coding project, and same thing for the group project. So this is project 1 to project 8 is a natural progression of someone's, as you progress in your career. This may happen, like it may happen in your college life, or it may happen later once you start working in a company. But you can go maybe until the point where you start working on group projects without using GitHub that much. But the moment you start collaborating on slightly large scale project with a group of people, you will inevitably come and you will come to the need of GitHub. And the interesting thing is, if you are wondering if only a group of friends among you or your colleagues, if only those are the people who are using GitHub, you should just have a look at this graph. The number of users of GitHub have been almost exponentially increasing in the last few years. And at this moment, I don't know the exact statistic at this moment in 2024, but I assume GitHub has already crossed 100 million developers. And this is really huge for such a tool. GitHub is not like a tool that everyone will find easy to use. It's in fact very difficult to use, but still the number of developers who are working on GitHub is so huge. And it's for a very good reason. It makes the life much easier once you start mastering it. And you might be wondering, since I have been mentioning Git and GitHub a little bit interchangeably up until this point, you might be wondering, what exactly is Git? Is that a company? Who owns it, etc.? I'll come to the exact distinction between Git versus GitHub, but I just wanted to answer this question so that it's clear for you. Git is not a company. Git is basically a framework developed by Linus Torvalds. He was also the founder of the Linux operating system. So Linux Foundation maintains Git, and this was developed in 2005. It's basically a framework for version control. So to give an example, let's say you have 10 different versions of a 10 gigabyte file. In each version, only very small changes there between each of these different versions of the same file. How would you perform version control? Would you be maintaining 10 different copies with with this slight modification of this 10 gigabyte file? That means you will be storing 100 gigabyte worth of data, out of which maybe 99% in each of these 10 versions are overlapping anyway. Why would you want to do that? So Git makes it very easy to maintain as many different versions as you want without blowing up the storage space. And there are many other things that Git can do as well, but I just wanted to give you an idea why this is so important, why this is such a big deal. And the name Git refers to the software which executes the framework proposed by the Git. So you can install Git, not GitHub, you can install Git on your computer, and it's a software, and it will allow you to execute certain commands, which will allow you to control the versions of whatever document you're working on. So if this is software development, Git will allow you to keep tracking the changes you make in the source code. And GitHub, on the other hand, it's actually the name of a company. So the company where I mentioned 100 million plus developers might be using right now, this GitHub is like a cloud-based hosting service for Git repositories, right? So Git repositories allow you to maintain different versions and keep tracking changes for your code base or for any other kind of documents. And GitHub allows you to host all of this on a cloud, meaning it's not on your local computer, it's somewhere else, so that you can collaborate on that thing with maybe 100 other people. There are certain GitHub repositories where tens of thousands of people are collaborating. So GitHub is different from Git. I hope this makes it a little bit clear for you. And as I mentioned, GitHub is right now a company that is owned by Microsoft. They were founded separately in 2008. And then 10 years later, in 2018, Microsoft acquired GitHub for $7.5 billion. I think it was one of the top 2 or top 3 acquisitions by Microsoft. Microsoft had acquired LinkedIn for, I don't know, $40 billion or something like that. And GitHub was also a significant investment made by Microsoft in terms of acquisition. And currently it has almost 100 million monthly active users. They generate a huge $1 billion annual revenue, and it has something called as repositories. Repository is nothing but, when I say repository, just imagine a folder in which you are managing a project. So it has 420 million repositories that is being worked on by different group of people. It may be individual, it may be repositories that individuals are working on. It may be repositories where a group of people are working on. So GitHub is a very, very useful tool in software development community and for a few other things. So the only thing is that you might get confused because the name GitHub also has Git in it. So you might be wondering, why is that the case? Why, if they are not the same thing, then why is the term Git present within GitHub? It is just the way it is, but basically GitHub is a hub or online platform for managing Git repositories. And they are maintained by 2 different companies. Git is maintained by Linux Foundation. GitHub is maintained by, currently it's owned by Microsoft. But it's just the way it is that the name has Git in both of them, which is maybe the reason why many people get confused. So if you are one of them, this might be the moment where you can make it very clear for once and for all. And let's briefly discuss about the difference between Git and GitHub in just one slide, so that from here on, you are very clear. Whenever we refer to Git or GitHub, you think in a right way. You compartmentalize it into 2 different ideas. Git, as I mentioned, which was developed in 2005, it is maintained on your local computer rather than in the cloud. So Git allows you to perform version control and keep tracking changes for your documents or code base on your local computer. And one thing that really makes Git so useful is its branching model. So by branching model, what I mean is Git does not create multiple copies of the same folder again and again and again. If you create different versions of this file, it just tracks which subfolders or subfiles within this entire big repository or folder system is changing. And just by keeping track of the change, the users of the Git will get a feel that they have access to a few different versions of the original document. So this saves space. This makes keeping track of changes very efficient, and everything will be, for a complex project, everything will be in a much more manageable fashion. GitHub, on the other hand, does not store things locally. Of course, it has an option where you can take things from cloud and store on your local computer, but it's originally designed as a cloud hosting service for Git repositories. So the hub word in the GitHub is something on the cloud. And by cloud, what I mean is something that is stored in a storage space, which is accessible through internet. And the great thing about this is that if you are working on a project, not alone with a group of friends, all of you can access the same code base. Let's say it's a software development project. You will have a code base, a centralized code base in which you are, maybe I am working on some features of the website. Someone else is working on maybe creating a user authentication system. Someone else might be working on some other feature for this software. So each of us can work on few different aspects of this software system without creating conflicts. So when I say conflict, when someone else has made some change, it's not going to affect the way I'll be working. They can work separately from what I am doing. And then finally, all of our changes can be brought together so that this final product, which we deliver to the customer, is one single thing. So GitHub allows us to do that. And this is why it is exceptionally popular among every single software developer, every single person who does coding for a living. The main question that we can ask here is, I have been mentioning coding again and again. Is GitHub used only for coding? It is used mostly in software development. So you will probably not be using Git if you are maybe working in material science, something like that. If you are working in an experimental setup, physical experiments you are conducting, and you have a lot of files, you probably won't be using GitHub to store or manage them. You will probably be using Dropbox or Google Drive or something like that. But there are many other uses of GitHub. For example, documentation. GitHub is a great way to create project wikis, README files, let's say SOPs, standard operating procedures for experiments. Many things can be documented in a very nice manner where you keep track of newer and newer versions. Some research groups. So when I was doing a PhD at MIT, most of the research groups used to use GitHub for managing versions of papers, data sets. I personally did not use because I never felt the need for it. We were working on Dropbox and just using Microsoft Word documents for writing different versions of the paper. But many other groups were working on papers and managing versions, everything using GitHub. And people also have created courses. So I have seen so many highly rated GitHub repositories, which are courses about machine learning or courses about large language model or generative AI. Such courses where if materials are scattered all over the internet, people create GitHub repositories where they collect and compile all the different resources and put it as hyperlinks in GitHub repositories. And some of these repositories have high number of stars. So star is something that you will see at the top right of the GitHub when you go there. I will show that during the part of the course where we will show creating your first GitHub repository. And if you are working in a team and if you have deadlines, you have tasks, subtasks within your team, which form part of a project management cycle. If you are developing a product, so once we were working in our startup, we had 5 or 6 different features that we were developing all at the same time, and different people were involved in different product features. And what we did was we used GitHub for creating something called as these project boards. And in these project boards, we can define the tasks that are done, tasks that are ongoing, the future tasks to be done, and also define timeline. And if people have not finished the tasks in a way that we are expecting them to finish it, we can also raise issues. Then people can comment on the issues. So it's like a very, very beautiful project management tool as well. And some people also, I have seen, they write books to collaborate using GitHub to collaborate with their editors or co-authors. For book writing, I have personally seen even better tools like Overleaf or even Google Document. I find very convenient, but I have seen people work on books even using GitHub. So these are all use cases of GitHub where coding is not necessarily a part of it. These are all non-coding related use cases of GitHub. Now, another thing which I want to talk about in this introduction section of the course is what exactly is a terminal? And do you have to know exactly how to use this terminal? So terminal is nothing but it looks like this black color window where you can type some weird commands, right? You must have seen this when people who are more experienced coders or experienced people at maybe managing the operating system, they use terminal very frequently. So terminal is the way in which you can interact with your operating system. You can interact with the operating system without using terminal also. For example, if you are copying a folder and pasting it in your desktop, you don't use terminal, right? You right click, you find the file wherever it is, you right click, copy, and right click paste in the desktop. So, but essentially what we are doing here is we are running a set of commands, but instead of writing those commands, you have a graphical user interface. So the folder that you see in front of your eyes, it's a graphical user interface for the folder that is present somewhere in the storage. Then when you right click copy, it's a graphical user interface way of maybe letting the operating system know that you're copying this. And when you right click paste, you're letting again the operating system know that you want to paste it somewhere else, or in a visual way. But you can do the exact same thing without the graphical user interface and through terminal. Now you might be wondering, if you have graphical user interface, why would you ever use the terminal? you would use the terminal in cases where people have not developed graphical user interface, GUI, for certain complex commands. So you can pretty much just understand this much. Terminal is kind of like a gateway to interact with operating system. And terminal is probably the simplest and maybe even I would say simplest in the sense that it's as simple as just this black window. You just type the commands there and you can perform pretty much any task, but it's difficult because you have to code. But for operating many softwares and including GitHub commands, you have to use terminal. Sorry, not GitHub commands. For using Git commands, you have to use terminal. But in this course, we'll be teaching you how to use GitHub without having to learn terminal. So in the part 2 of the course, when we cover Git, of course, you will learn how to use terminal. But in part 3 and part 4 of the course, you will also see alternate methods of operating GitHub without having to even touch the terminal. So this last sentence, please take note of that. Terminal allows you to execute certain complex tasks for which a UI is not available. For example, let's say fetching the latest changes from a GitHub repository into your local machine. This is a bit of a complex task. Currently, at the moment, of course, there exists a graphical user interface for executing this in the form of a software called GitHub Desktop. But before GitHub Desktop was introduced, this was purely executed through terminal commands because it's a complex request. So there are many such tasks for which you will have to use terminal. So in a regular workflow, if you're working on a document, a Word document or something like that, when you work on this in Dropbox, what happens is everyone will have access to the same document basically. So let's say initially, if I'm writing a proposal document, I'll create the initial draft. Then someone else might add the budget, someone else might add intro, cover letter, and then it's ready for submission. This is if people are working asynchronously, not at the same time. Have you noticed if you work in Dropbox, if two people are working on the same thing at the same time, Dropbox will create copies of the same document. So it might say Sridhar's copy of proposal, someone else Raj's copy of proposal. It will save like that if both me and Raj have an unsaved version of the same document in Dropbox. So this is one way in which Dropbox keep track of version control. Then each time another person saves while I have an unsaved changes on a particular document, Dropbox will create another copy of the same document. I don't think this is the most efficient way to do it. This issue is not there if you are working on a Google document. Google Doc very nicely keep track of real-time changes. Even if 3 people are working on the document simultaneously, the changes someone else is making, real-time reflects on your end. This is also because Google Docs can directly, it saves the changes very frequently, automatically. The definition of version control when it comes to coding or software development is quite different. So let's say we want to build a mobile application. And for this, we might start with a certain code base. For example, here in the starting, all the developers in the team will have access to the same code base. And let me just annotate it here. So we start from here, and maybe I am working on login/sign up feature. So what I will do is I will create my own branch like this, and then I will start working on the features that I am supposed to be working on. Then once I build the initial version of the first feature, someone else might take it and fix some issues. So here the main branch, which goes like this is the main code base. It starts from the initial, whatever is the initial shape, and it's supposed to end in a shape where it is good enough for public release. So if I'm releasing my app on Google Play Store, the original code base for the app, it should start from its initial version to the final release version, right? But in between, at any given point of time, if you have worked in software development or app development, people will be working on multiple features. Some features may not even work. Some features may be working. So let's say once the feature A is ready, we might release the alpha version of the app. So it's like a test version of the app for few users. And this will develop, a few more changes might happen in the main code base of the app, and then a beta version is released. And finally, before releasing the final release of the app, we might be adding feature B. We might be fixing some issues. There will be bug fixes, as you can see here. All of these things will be happening. And these things will happen parallelly, not in series. If there are 5 developers, there will be one developer mainly working on feature A, another developer on feature B. There will be some other people who's tasked with fixing bugs after the feature A is halfway completed, etc. So this is what we mean by version control in the context of software development or coding, where there are multiple versions of the code base existing at any given point of time. So each of these are versions of code bases with some changes. These are probably, we can call this as some checkpoints or milestones. Something is different between the code base at each of these points. And do you know how Git or GitHub stores these different versions? If 99% of the code is the same for all of these different versions, which is very likely, only a small part of the code base might change. When you add a feature, maybe the initial, let's say initially there are 30,000 lines of code, right? And so 30K lines, and when you add feature A, maybe another 1K lines are added. So it becomes 31K. This is only what, like a 3% increase, right? So only 3% of the code base is changing. Remaining 97% is unchanged. So when you are working on feature A, it does not make sense to make copy of the remaining 97% of the code base or files unnecessarily. So if that 97% is common between all of these different versions, it can just remain somewhere, and these individual versions can just keep track of what changes it has compared to its mother branch, right? And now in the final release, if there is some way in which all of these changes can be accumulated into one single code file, that will be awesome. And that's exactly what we can do using GitHub or Git. So we will learn all of that as part of this course. If you are not fully understanding what I'm saying here in terms of version control, which is very likely, because I would ideally like to show you this using an actual hands-on example. And I intend to do that in the second part of this course. But it's okay if you are not fully understanding what exactly, how exactly to visualize this. Version control is probably one of the most useful aspect or feature of Git/GitHub. Now, if you start working on GitHub, there are a few rookie mistakes everyone makes. And one of the intentions of this course is to help you prevent these rookie mistakes. So I remember at one point when we were building our Visuara's first version of the website, we worked on it for one week or something, and I had a lot of changes on my end, and I did not push those changes. I did not commit those changes. So in GitHub, there are two stages. One is you commit the changes, meaning I accept that whatever changes I have made in my code base is acceptable to me. So I commit. And after committing, the changes are still in my local computer. I have to push it, meaning I have to upload those changes into the GitHub cloud. And that step is called pushing. We'll come into the details of this, but what I did is I forgot to commit my change. So there were a lot of changes and I was not familiar with GitHub. And what I did is I synchronized my local folder with that of what was there in the cloud. So then what happened is the cloud, whatever there was on the cloud was 7 days older than what I had in my local computer. So then what happened is all the changes I made in the past 7 days basically got erased, because I pulled from origin, meaning I downloaded all the changes, all the things that was there on the cloud, which was 7 days outdated version, into my local computer, and 7 days of hard work was erased. And these things can very much happen when you start working on GitHub. And that is exactly the reason why there are these memes existing on internet. If you search Git commit memes on Google, you will find so many of them. So it's a very common issue, and you must try to avoid it. And this can also cause catastrophic events in big companies. You might have heard of a CrowdStrike outage, which happened in 2024, early part of 2024. And all of this happened because of the incorrect way of using Git/GitHub. So we will cover a bunch of these rookie mistakes in detail in this course, but please be feeling relieved that once you finish this course, you will feel very comfortable to think about different ways in which you can prevent these mistakes. You can also educate your colleagues on how to effectively work on GitHub without causing these catastrophic mistakes for your entire company. GitHub is not, by the way, the only platform that allows you to host Git repositories. There are these platforms like SourceForge, GitKraken, GitLab, Bitbucket, etc. We will cover a little bit of GitLab in the last part of this course. But we would not recommend any of these platforms over GitHub. Although there are slight differences, GitHub is still by far the most popular Git repository hosting platform in the world. Many people I have seen in app development and all use GitLab for storing their versions, but I would say it's a matter of personal preference. I personally almost always prefer GitHub. Now, just a small question. If you are working on a small project, this we covered already. Do you need to know Git or GitHub? The answer is no. You don't have to know Git or GitHub. So, but you will not be in this stage for a very long time in your life. Maybe if you are a college student in the first year, second year, third year, maybe you are working on small projects and you don't need to know anything with respect to Git or GitHub. But the moment you start working on maybe your thesis project or something that is slightly more difficult, if once you start doing your internship, then GitHub becomes a completely necessary thing. Another question is, Git looks a bit complicated because there are a lot of terminal commands. This is also for someone who is familiar with Git. I'm assuming that, so if you are watching this part of the lecture, I'm assuming that you have heard a little bit of GitHub. If you have not, don't worry, but I'm trying to address the people who have heard of Git or who have seen the way Git works a little bit, and maybe they have felt intimidated by it because of the terminal commands. So if you feel that Git looks a bit complicated because of the large number of terminal commands, do you think you will have to use Git directly if you are using GitHub? No, you don't have to use Git directly. Although in the commands you will be calling Git, you don't have to directly use Git. You could use GitHub through GitHub Desktop also. So the answer for this is also no. So don't worry if you really do not like to write terminal commands or even remember them. Do not worry if you think like, okay, I wish to learn GitHub, but I don't wish to use terminal. If you are someone like that, don't worry. This course is for you. In the GitHub Desktop section, we will be answering this question in complete detail. And if you don't want to use Git or GitHub altogether, we already showed some GitHub alternatives like GitLab, Bitbucket, etc. But we don't recommend, personally, I don't recommend anything other than Git or GitHub. No other alternatives are good enough. For version control, obviously Git is the best. For using Git on the cloud, GitHub is the best. GitLab is also popular, but GitHub is orders of magnitude more popular. And for using GitHub without having to use terminal commands, using a graphical user interface, GitHub Desktop is the best. So these just understand these three names: Git, GitHub, and GitHub Desktop. So the rest of this course will be in detail covering each of these three items separately in full detail. So we'll be going through hands-on examples so that if you walk through the entire course content with us, you will feel very comfortable. So bottom line, we don't recommend any alternatives. Another question that we have got while conducting our webinars in the past is, which one is more important, Git or GitHub? This is a great question because GitHub is basically based on Git, right? So in my opinion, Git is more important in the sense that Git will probably stay longer. It might not get replaced by anything, but GitHub can get replaced. Maybe if GitLab becomes more popular due to whatever reason, maybe due to some features that it allows or for larger storage space or whatever, maybe GitHub will get replaced by GitLab, who knows? But the underlying framework for both of these would be Git. So the Git framework is unlikely to be replaced. I strongly think that it will survive for a very, very long time. But that being said, for implementing the Git framework, you just need to learn whatever is the online hosting service of that time. In the present times, GitHub is the best online hosting service for Git repositories. So just learn GitHub. If you learn GitHub, you will automatically be using Git. And for learning GitHub, you can also learn GitHub Desktop, which we'll come to in the later part of the course. But please know that maybe 20 years down the line, I don't know if GitHub will exist. Maybe it will exist, but I'm almost certain that Git will continue to exist because it's a very, very, I would say, very natural way of doing version control, the Git framework. Now, this is another meme that is my favorite because I personally don't use terminal for operating GitHub. I use GitHub Desktop. So I don't like to write terminal commands for performing certain actions in GitHub. I don't like to clone repositories by writing terminal command. I don't like to push my changes by writing terminal commands. I don't like to create pull requests by writing terminal commands. All these operations are don't worry if you're not familiar with these operations, but all of these operations are well-defined operations which you can operate using just a single mouse click if you have GitHub Desktop. So GitHub Desktop is, you can imagine as if by clicking a mouse button, it will call a terminal command and then it will execute what you want to execute. If you want to push your changes, meaning upload your changes from your local computer to GitHub Cloud with just a click of a mouse button, you can do that using GitHub Desktop. So I am one of those those people who was a strong proponent for GitHub Desktop. But I know a lot of experienced coders and a lot of people who are more serious with respect to these things. They really don't like GitHub Desktop. There are clearly two schools of thought here. But I'm of that school of thought who's shameless and who does not have any guilt in admitting that I prefer GitHub Desktop over terminal. So this is that. We will show you how to download this, how to install this, how to use this, etc. But basically GitHub Desktop looks something like this. This is like a graphical user interface of GitHub for GitHub Desktop. And see, this is like fetch origin. It's like a mouse click. Here, changing the branch, it's one mouse click. Committing your changes, it's another mouse click. So it's very, very easy to operate GitHub without having to write any code. I strongly believe that using GitHub Desktop GUI, graphical user interface, you can do things much faster. But anyways, since this course is, I don't want to bias you towards GitHub Desktop, but I'm just saying this because if you are worried that, oh, you will try to learn Git through this course and you won't understand it because it's complex, then you will try to learn GitHub and you still don't understand because it has a lot of again terminal commands involved and it's complex. Don't worry about any of that. You will learn all of that, and if you prefer, without writing the code, you will also end up learning GitHub Desktop. So that's all what I wanted to convey in these slides. And GitHub Desktop also is like just like how you download and install a software. I don't want to go into the details of this. I will of course share the link for GitHub download with all of you, but just know that it's very, very simple. But I just wanted to take a moment before I end this first lecture, which is the introductory lecture, to just come and recap the structure of this masterclass. So in this particular lecture, we looked at the importance of Git or GitHub, like at what point of your life will you be using Git or GitHub. If you are a working professional, or if you are a student who would like to work in a company, or who is interested in doing internships, we discussed 8 different project cases in which you may, in some of which you may have to use GitHub, in some of which you will not have to use GitHub. We also discussed that Git and GitHub are 2 different things. Git is a version control system, and GitHub is an online hosting service for GitHub. We also talked about GitHub Desktop, which is a very easy way for using GitHub, and GitHub is an easy way for maintaining Git repositories online. And in the next part of the course, immediately we'll be covering Git in complete detail. So Git is the basis for everything. So I will recommend you to not skip anything from the Git chapter. So this will be covered by Dr. Raj Dandekar. So he'll be showing you how to wrap your mind around the concept of Git, the concept of version control, and what does each Git command mean. Like there is push, commit, pull, create pull request, clone repository, fork repository. There are so many commands. So we'll start from the very basics, and you will, by the end of this part of the course, part 2 of the course, you will also be very proficient with certain advanced Git commands. Then after that, we'll be talking about GitHub in the 3rd part of the course. And in this part, Abhijit will walk us through details of Git. He will also be covering certain Git commands, because he'll show you how to operate GitHub using terminal. And we'll start from the basics and we'll move till to the advanced part. And in the part 4 of the course, you will learn about GitHub Desktop, which is a no-code way of operating GitHub. And I will be covering this part. My name is Dr. Sridath. And you will learn different operations that you can perform in GitHub Desktop, which is exact same as what you can perform using terminal in GitHub. And we will also be taking a hands-on example so that you can understand very easily. Then part 5 and part 6 will cover a collection of ideas. In part 5, we will show you, if you are a student or researcher or an industry professional, different use cases for where you might end up using GitHub, and how you can do that through some demonstrations. And this part will be split equally between all of us who are the instructors of the course. And part 6 also will be covered by all the instructors of the course. And in part 6, we'll show you how to build and host websites on GitHub, how to use GitLab a little bit. As I mentioned, GitLab is a competitor of GitHub. We will show you a few different famous GitHub repositories, and we'll also show you continuous deployment, how to do that in GitHub. So basically, whatever changes you make into your GitHub repository to a particular branch, it will directly reflect in, let's say, a hosted website, if the website code base is stored in GitHub. And we will finally teach you how to make open source contributions. We'll show you some example projects where you can actually contribute in an open source way and put it all on your resume. So please welcome to this masterclass. And I sincerely hope that you spent good enough time in learning all the concepts in this, so that at the end of the day, as I mentioned at the beginning of this introduction lecture, you will be taken from that group of people who have heard GitHub to that small group of people who actually know GitHub. So once again, welcome to the course.